Welcome to Climate Courage. My name is Andrea Edwards, and today our topic is we're not going to sustainability our way out of this crisis. But I'm just going to bring up Praveen, who's just joined us. And there we go. Hello, Praveen.
Hi.
So we can start by introducing Praveen, who I actually met Praveen on LinkedIn because he was sharing some really amazing content through Aluminum and some other publications as well, right, Praveen?
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, and then we have a very old friend of mine. Well, not that you're old, Dales. Pete Kerr. Yeah, no, you're still looking good. And we met a long time ago. You were still working at the Reserve Bank of Australia at the time, and now you are working as a consultant in renewable energy. So, looking forward to hearing your story. And
mate.
the adorable Karen Leong, who's a
Mm.
human capital transformation specialist, which I think is such a critical skill right now, but also someone who is really passionate about the environment as well. So welcome, Karen. So I figured the best thing we could do is give everyone a sense of who we've got here, where I won't put Praveen on the spot because you've just joined us. But Karen, do you want to start and just sort of let everyone know who you are and what you do and what you care about?
I have to say I'm a reformed mercenary because I used to be focused on helping companies achieve runaway growth through IPOs with one of the big four. And so after decades of just hard work and helping other companies make money, then I took a break. And I think I went into fashion. Fashion, of course, as we know, is also one of the major polluters nowadays.
Yep.
But set up my own fashion label, sold it. And now for the last 15 years, I've been in human capital. So I think working more from the heart, but it's very exciting, helping companies empower high trust cultures. So can't wait to share more.
And I had no idea about the fashion bit, so we'll have to talk about that next time we see. Pete, do you want to tell everyone your story?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. And thanks for the invite. I'm lovely to meet you all. Yeah, PK, I've had many careers. Started out as an economist and then had my midlife crisis early. So did chefing and journalism, but eventually found my way into energy and just fell in love with energy and realised how important it was to everyone's lives, but more importantly, how important it is to the transition and to climate change. So I'm passionate about helping companies and people make the move to renewable energy as quickly as possible. And that's what I'm here to talk about.
Yeah. And you're based in Perth. So Karen's in
I'm
Singapore.
based in Perth, yeah. So
you're calling from Perth.
Run a small consultancy here in Perth. You know, wear occasionally loud jackets. People kind of, you know, this one was made by my wife. It's a famous Indigenous artist in Australia, Colleen Wallace. So, proud also of the efforts that are being done on Aboriginal reconciliation in WA. So,
yeah. No, it's pretty powerful. It's amazing what's going on. So I'm obviously calling in from Thailand, where we're going through this incredible heat wave, and so is Praveen, who's in India, where they're getting it even worse. So do you want to introduce yourself for us, Praveen?
Yep. Thank you. Really appreciate this and lovely meeting all of you. So yes, I spent a lot of time in the insurance industry in India, outside India, and that enabled me. I'm a very curious guy. I've been always dabbling in some form or the other of writing. And more recently, I decided to come out of my full-time work. And thanks to COVID, that was a great facilitator. I've been into, lock, stock, and barrel into climate issues and stuff like sustainability. Energy has always been a major draw because I followed India's own energy transition. The time I used to be in Hong Kong and the government was looking at bringing in major power producers from wherever they were. Hong Kong couldn't be missed. So I've kind of intermediated in some of them. But coming back to present, I live in Mumbai. Again, thanks to COVID, I spend time in another smaller city from time to time, depending on the weather and convenience. But other than that, I read and write, and that's my 7 to 8 hours of work, and that helps my passion of staying connected. And thankfully, the network is right from Brazil to New Zealand, and as I said, I'm curious. I somehow missed the two of you. I got hold of Andrea. Sorry, I call you Andrea. I should be calling
That's
you
okay.
Andrea.
Whatever.
I am delighted to meet the two stars here, and look forward to staying in touch.
Muriel's here just saying that she's having trouble seeing the event. So I hope you can get in. I'm not sure what to do. That's StreamYard for you. But anyway, I'm sure it will start. All right. So we've got a really big topic. It's probably the most ambitious one I've ever attempted. But I think we are in a time where we need to be ambitious. And I think we've got to start with numbers, right? And specifically around the middle class. So let me tell you a story. So plastic was invented in 1907. But the plastic bag was invented in 1959 by a Swedish scientist or engineer who basically saw the massive deforestation that was happening because of paper bags and said, we've got to stop this. And of course, the original plastic bags were thicker and were never meant to be single use. But if we start putting some numbers on it, so in 1959, there were 2.9 billion people. And of course, today we have 8 billion people. So the middle class, which is basically the individuals who can go out there and buy big ticket items like cars or whatever, this is the group that has grown exponentially. And let me assure you, we're not letting the 0.1% off. Those individuals with emissions the size of countries, that's another thing. But there's this explosive growth in the middle class right across the world, but especially in Asia. And most of this growth has happened outside of the rich Western countries. So I couldn't find any middle class numbers for 1959. But back in 2013, when I was actually at Microsoft, I wrote a paper with one of the guys that was covering the aerospace industry. And at the time I uncovered we had 500 million middle class people in the world. And the World Economic Forum predicted that would grow to 1.75 billion people by 2020. At the time, it was considered the greatest seismic shift humanity had ever experienced, right? So the actual numbers in 2020, we hit 3.5 billion upper and lower middle class people. And by 2030, it's expected to grow to 4.8 billion people. So, of course, what are middle class people? And we are all in that bracket, right, based on what we do. What do we spend our money on? Obviously, food, more meat. When countries get wealthier, their meat consumption goes up. Seafood, clothes, cars, fridges, bigger homes, flights, holidays, all of those things, right? So the problem was pointed out back at the beginning of the last decade, and literally nothing has been done to stop that growth. In fact, if you look at the growth charts, it's just constantly going up. Much of the wealth is in this new region too, and everyone, everywhere we go, we can see people enjoying this wealth because they can go and do things that they couldn't do, especially growing up in poorer families. So, Karen, I know this is a massive question, and I have no idea where this is going to go, but how can we get this message out, especially in the Asia Pacific region? And how do we help the new middle class understand that actually desiring what the original middle class had is actually the path to catastrophe? And I suppose what we've got to really look at doing is working out how do we tell a story that helps people understand that we need to actually create something, a new way of living, a new way of being. Do you want to start by sharing your thoughts, and then when Pete and Praveen jump in afterwards if you've got something as well?
I mean, you are so right, Andrea. I mean, I love how you frame it because we were sold this story, and it's such a big story that it started ever since the Industrial Revolution, and where the advertising industry needed a story to get us to buy more stuff, to spend more money, and so we bought into this story. But what happened is that even in companies have also bought into the story of relentless growth. There is no such thing as degrowth, right? Mm-hmm. So even in school textbook, we study, like market theory. A good company is a profitable one. So I think we do, like what you say, Andrea, we need a different story. But I can share 3 points how stories can easily be weaved. Because number one, through, strong governments can also shift stories. You look at China, for example, you know, how just a couple of years ago, they started to clamp down on growth. And I think, was it Xi Jinping? I think in 2021, he had already created a new story. They called it the, what did they call it? They called it common prosperity, right? So that was the story to say they need to address inequality. And they need to clamp down on even political leaders, you know, wearing expensive watches, spending a lot of money. So this actually shaped the behavior of all the political leadership. And so I think it is possible, you know, at the government level, and it's also possible in social media. So say, for example, Marie Kondo, right? People started to have houses full of stuff, but now she is a new story where people talk about simplicity, about living simple lives, about decluttering, about not buying too much, keeping only the things that spark joy. And it's not surprising that a lot of people actually want to live a life of less clutter and simplicity. So maybe that's why she's so popular on Netflix. And so that's one, actually creating a new story that shows a new possibility with less stress. And I think the second thing is we need to create a story which is, it showcases the risk of not taking action. Because I know that there is a lot of positivity that, you know, like Hollywood stories where, you know, the middle class is also pretty sheltered, even in the recent Asian heat wave. They got air conditioning. They are not the laborers toiling in the sun under, you know, 50 plus degrees of heat. You know, people are working in air conditioned offices. So I think the key thing is to be able to link the heat waves, the recent April Asian heat waves, with a more sinister reality that if nothing is done in the next couple of years, it's going to be a point of no return. Whether through social media, influencers, we need to bring that closer to home. And I think the third thing is, you know, you do need to give people some optimism that things can change. Because, you know, Andrea, you talk a lot about, there's a lot of eco-anxiety where people feel that there is no point doing anything. I think we need to temper the doomsday with the fact that, hey, we need winning stories. We need now to start really spinning all the successes. So, I mean, I love the winning stories, like, what are some winning stories that I picked up? The fact that, the fact that the solar wind storage projects are actually taking off. I love the stories that people are trying to take down the dirtiest banks. I think it was the Royal Bank of Canada. It funded $42 billion in dirty money, financing the oil industry. And I think we need these that, you know, people are taking them down. We need to feel that, yes, we could make simple changes like giving up meat on certain days. Like I decided to give up meat for a month. That was about 1.5 years ago. And, you know, I just never stopped month after month. And so I think small shifts does make a difference. Like I gave up my car. I decided in Singapore owning a car is very expensive. I might as well, you know, use public transport. My kids walk to school, and it is so liberating actually because we cycle everywhere. I mean, so we're a cycling family. So I think small actions can have a big impact. So remember, we just need to change the story.
Nice. I like what you said about China, but I wish they did it in a more positive way because to me it wasn't. It felt like a war on wealth. You know, so the whole Alibaba, Jack Ma story and the way that was handled and how we didn't even see him, right? I think, you know, come on, comrades, let's come together and do this. And I think a country like China, even a country like Singapore, from the leaders of the government, they could do that. They can call the people to action. Whereas countries like Australia or America might struggle a little bit to get that consensus. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, I would think, sorry, Pete.
No, I mean,
okay.
That was not me directly.
So I think Karen made a very strong point. You know, role models are very important, and particularly in the Asian societies, whichever the country be, you know, each one has had a cycle. You know, the tiger economies came to action much ahead of the rest, including China and India. And somehow, celebrating material wealth has become the order of the day. And I don't think much is really happening to bring down consumption, consumerism, and to really effect uh, decarbonization. Sorry for all this jargon, but the fact of the matter is that uh, look at the global trade. Much of it is concentrated in Asia Pac. Look at the young populations. Look at the companies growing. Look at the GDP share of these companies growing. Look at what the Rolexes are selling, what the perfumes are selling, where are the cars selling, uh, what brands are selling. No more small cars, it's the big cars, and the biggest of big cars are being bought and sold here. So while you and I may decide not to go for a car, um, there are still a lot of young people who want to live and practice the American dream. So this is where the problem is, and this is how I will also want to dovetail in the India story, and probably seek your wisdom as to what possibly can be done to bring this into some kind of check and balance.
I like the idea of the story for each country, because it needs to be specific to each country. And that's somebody was posting about the young lady at the youngest UN ambassador, and she went out and translated all of this research. I thought it was such a brilliant story, because that's exactly what needs to happen. Because I always say I'm a white face in Asia. I can't be a face of the conversation because of past colonial history, right? And I have to respect that, because I can't say you can't do this, because that's it's not going to be received. But Karen, you talking in Singapore matters, because you're a Singaporean, right? And that local message, local story, I think is critical. Pete, and I think you got some thoughts on this one.
I'm in a similar situation to you, but I do like Karen's point about I've been involved as a journalist in the power of story in corporate communications as well. Power of story, I think it's a big one. I did like the point about leaving people with optimism, though, and it's interesting. I'll try and put together. I think some of the challenges of these conversations and these stories are, not wanting to put a guilt trip on people, but I reckon you can actually think laterally and have a great story and actually use consumerism in a positive way. And so here's a little spin I'll put on it. Andrew, I know you've shared and you speak a fair bit actually about Saul Griffiths. He is an amazing author and thinker about electrification of the system, and I'd urge you all to, if you haven't, to check him out. But he's advised everyone from Joe Biden all the way through to his local community in Wollongong. But he makes a very simple point, and it kind of gives us hope, and it's that we do have the technology right now to arrest global warming or keep warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. It actually exists today, and you think, that's going to cost a lot, but in fact, it might not. His solution is quite simple. If it still has some challenges, but there are a couple of major things, maybe 5 things that people will buy in their life, or appliances that they'll buy in their life. One's a car, one's a hot water heater, one's a gas or a cooktop, generally gas. One's maybe how you heat your house. So his point is a very simple one. You don't have to replace them all overnight. If you just over time, as they break, replace them with an electric appliance, and that electricity comes from renewable energy. If we did that both at a business level and a household level across the globe over the next 20 or 30 years, that is consistent scientifically with keeping temperatures at 1.5 degree or below. So that's a very tangible kind of hopeful message that you can give people. Now, the challenge, of course, is then supplying all those appliances with renewable power. We can maybe talk about that later. But I kind of like what can we do? What can we do on what might be a micro scale, but if it's replicated everywhere, that could be an enormous force. And so I'm a big believer of the electrify everything story, and I still think we have time if we push hard enough with government support to limit the damaging temperature rises that we're seeing.
Yeah. I think the other side is we have to fundamentally change how we eat. Like that's a huge part of it. And you know,
water is a massive one that we may touch on. It actually, it's probably even a bigger issue than energy potentially. There's a lot less ways of getting water, and you know, even in my hometown of Perth, we're up to our 3rd desalination plant along the way. So we're now manufacturing. We're in manufacturing water stage, so we've run out of water to feed this community because of drying climate. So that's going to be a massive challenge as well. To your point, Andrea, then you know, how do you crop and use that water to crop or to feed livestock? So not denying the challenges, but I do think we've got some existing technical solutions that, with the right effort and you know, even just the simple steps that a whole globe might make, can at least get us there.
Yeah. I've got this idea. It's called Join the 1 Billion movement, and we need to imperfectly change, right? And we need 1 billion people doing it, and then that ripples out to sort of consume the world. Yeah, but there's some big, and the other thing is, I think wherever we are, we need to go out and regenerate the environment based on what it was 50 years ago with plants and animals and everything. And see, I think that's seagrass, all of the stuff. But all right, so I'm introducing these. They're not really questions. It's sort of thoughts, and it's a bit longer than normal. But when I was sort of thinking through how to do this topic, it's so big I couldn't do it simply. So anyway, all right. So we've got to solve our problems with different thinking if we want to get it right. And so last year, I think I was either in the UK or not long after. They're experiencing massive housing shortages, as I know is happening in Australia and other Western democracies, right? But in the UK, they basically revealed that if they built enough houses to house everyone that didn't have one, the emissions from that would blow out the UK's entire emissions budget. So I think that, you know, surely we're at a point now where we need to be saying, what's wrong in the system that we need to fix before we do something that's going to create more emissions. Like I'm watching things being built here that predicted sea level rises. They will overcome those facilities before anyone will actually even move into them. So like it's some crazy stuff. So we're suffering the emissions of their creation, and they will probably never be lived in. But you know, in a lot of countries around the world, Airbnbs are a massive issue. You know, they're a massive issue. And the other one is people with second homes who only spend a couple of weeks in them a year. So surely we should be sort of looking at things like that and saying that can no longer be. So we can get people in houses. But from electric vehicles to solar panels, you know, some of these are unavoidable, like solar panels. And if you look at the data on how much copper and all of the different precious metals they're going to need, we have to accept some of those costs, but we can't accept them all. And so EVs to me are a classic example, right? So the average city or the main cities of a country emit 70% of the country's total emissions, right? So the idea that everyone's going to have their own EV to drive around to replace their fossil fuel car to me seems a little bit crazy. So why can't we look at coming up with a system where and it's easier in the cities than in the country, right? There's pools of people driving EVs around, picking people up and taking them to public transport, trams, trains, buses, whatever makes sense for the country. You can hire an EV for short, you know, if you need to drive up somewhere for a period of time, or longer term taxis that are EVs. But the idea that we can all replace what we have with something sustainable, and then you look at the numbers of the amount of emissions created from the creation, like the fossil fuels that are involved in the creation of EVs, there's no question they release less EVs on the emissions on the road, but the creation of them, you still need to counter that out at a point when we need to be dropping it, not increasing it. So Pete, I know you've got lots of different sort of perspectives here. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, and happy obviously for everyone else's perspective. I think Karen and Praveen have also touched on some of the points about EVs, and you know, sort of like the scale of, you know, the cars, but also do you need one? So yeah, look, I don't have a car either. We went car free, and we're in a fortunate position because we're in a kind of a, you know, dense city. We don't have kids, so you know, it's not for everyone. But EVs are actually a really good example of perhaps the technology that exists to, you know, help us our climate goals, but also trying to sow the seeds so that the consumption of resources is not huge. So they kind of have a dual-edged sword for me. So I think the technology is almost there for autonomous vehicles. That will reduce dramatically your need to own your own car. So that's a good one. I use an app called Kinto in Australia. I don't know what it's called overseas, but Toyota basically have acknowledged that there are going to be less cars owned by people in aggregate. And so they have a car sharing app, and your phone becomes your key. It's actually really cool. I just turn up to the dealership, click, and then I'm off and I drive, and it's all measured by the phone. So there's some really good tech that you can do to share resources, and I think it's pretty much here, or it's close to being here. EVs are also brilliant in another way. Electrically, you're basically buying a battery and you're getting a car for free. So forget the car. You're not actually buying a car. You're buying a battery now, and they're really quite big. And what they can do is they can shift and help shift electricity through the day. So maybe these cars are parked at work and there's some solar panels on the rooftop, and they can charge the battery, and then at night they can go home, and when everyone's turning on their air conditioning at night, the cars can just discharge back that energy into the grid, and it helps balance things. So you don't need to build these super grids because you've got this huge fleet of EVs. So look, they're the really good side of EVs for me. So yes, we do need to get to sharing more resources because there's lots of copper in these things. I think it can help us not overbuild infrastructure. But the problem is, the bigger the car you get, the bigger the battery you get. And the tendency has been in new EVs, and I'd be interested in Praveen's views as well in India. Maybe the car sizes aren't as big, but the new EVs that are coming out are enormous, and they take an enormous battery, and those batteries are very hard to recycle at the moment. So you kind of got to somehow get people used to the fact that maybe I don't need the enormous EV, because I can then have a consequential sort of impact on all those resources that are building this thing, and it'll be less impact on recycling, etc. So that's still a big challenge, I think, with EVs. But that's where I'll leave it, because I've had enough to say. But yeah, interested in everyone else's thoughts.
I love what you say, Peter. And I thought, the better way, and there's a different way, which is actually to change work practices. Because, the COVID-19 has exposed a new way of working from home. I think companies can have smaller offices. People only need to commute to connect. And so it's really about, I remember, was it JP Morgan, the CEO ordered everybody back. And now most of the major banks insist that everybody comes back. But instead of assuming people need to be in the office to prove they're productive, I think you need to rethink in how to lead and manage and inspire performance. So there needs to be a shift. Companies should actually downsize so that they have much less costs. People need to travel less. And then efforts can be spent in advocating for better infrastructure. Because sometimes you can't tell a family that you can't drive if there is no supporting infrastructure. So I think you touched upon it, Peter, right? That that's the next very, very important step. Advocacy.
For us, we have to have a car. There's no way. There's no public system, right?
And this is the great challenge. But also when you try. Sorry. Yeah.
No, the electric. No, it's okay. It's all right. No, but the electric infrastructure is not in place either. So, for us, it's just not even a possibility. But Karen, the thing about working from home. So during COVID, basically companies' emissions increased dramatically because all of the individual people working from home, they were actually, as businesses, using a lot more energy rather than that one central place where you just have aircon for everyone, especially in hot places, right? So when everyone was actually spread out, it actually started. So it's almost like we need to have sort of like working bubbles, walking distance from homes, right? So you can, so it's not the central office; it's the sort of sporadic, spread out, right? But that's the thing. It's different thinking, right? But Praveen, what about in India? Have you got the infrastructure yet?
The infrastructure is still in a very nascent stage, but the root cause is the source of power. The source of power is coal, then whether you use an electric car or you use any other form of fossil fuel, uh, you're still using fossil fuel. So
Yeah.
you may move the emission from the tailpipe to the power plant chimney, but it's still there.
Yeah.
You need a radical shift, unless as I'm going to perhaps bring that point in the course of our discussion. You have a significant renewable energy possibility, which can be 100%. Uh, you know, I keep saying God willing, because it needs all the divine blessings to happen, because otherwise we have a major existential problem. Once you get uh, the genuine renewable energy as the driver of all the engines, uh, you know this discussion for India won't really, it would be just a moot point, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really good observation. Saul Griffith makes that important point. He says you've got to electrify everything, but it has to be with renewable energy. That's obviously the challenge, but there's a pathway at least.
Yeah, I think that's one of the problems that maybe isn't understood, sort of, especially by Western countries. So people always say to me, "Why did we get here so quickly?" And the reason we got here so quickly is because China just exploded and it built its economy on the back of fossil fuels, right?
Mm.
And that's why we're where we are today, right? India is at that point of growth that if it grows in the same way, we're going to, I mean, it's basically game over, really, like literally game over, because it's not because it's such a big population, but just the amount of, it's built on the back of coal, right? And, one of the only ways I can see us having a chance, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, Praveen, is the rest of the world has to help India become a sustainable energy country. But no country's ever built themselves as a they've all built themselves on the back of fossil fuels, every single country on this planet, right? So India is now at the point, I talked about it in my last weekend reads, where it's being required to do something that's never been done before. It's the most populous nation on earth, it soon will be. So Praveen, from your perspective and what you're seeing in India, what's going on? What's the conversation?
Yeah, okay.
Is there hope?
Yeah, there has to be hope, and there has to be a wish as well. But it's not just pure wishful thinking. But we are at a point where it has to be done. And you are right, it is not just India's problem, because there are lots of overlapping stories here. And I want to just give you a quick overview of past, present, future, and how it all interplays, and why the world must also chip in, because it's in everyone's well-being to get this right. It's not just India's problem, but it's a proof that all of us can proceed on these lines. So very quickly, there's a friend of mine who wrote a book called India's Cold Story, and I want to bring that metaphor in. So hence, I'll just allude to a couple of these writings. So this book is a great story about how coal was first exploited in India. India, by the way, is amongst the top 3 countries with coal deposits, but it never leveraged that just when every other country started industrializing. So it was a late starter, thanks to the socialism and some of those other ideologies that it chose to tread upon. But why was this coal exploited? The trains hadn't happened. India was then a British colony, a big country. A lot of things had to be transported, raw material and finished goods, but that was not it. It was opium going from India to China that required coal. And you had to power your steamboats and all that. That's a big story. But the metaphor is, that's when we got kind of hooked onto coal. And we can't get over our coal obsession. The second thing is, 1991 was a turning point when suddenly pushed to the wall, the Indian economy had to be opened up and they had to shed socialism. They were going broke, balance of payment, and all that was a huge issue. And all this began to transform the Indian economy into a market driven economy. Not ideal, but it was a definite move towards capitalism. While it was not communist, but India has all forms of politics. Some Indian states have communism, some are more socialistic, some are really capitalistic. So we have a whole lot of these diversities in play, and one needs to understand that the Indian GDP, which was being uh, called as Hindu growth rate because it won't go beyond 2 to 2.5% per annum, suddenly started leaping, and everyone started talking about the great Indian tiger economy and stuff like that. So where did it bring the Indian economy? Today it's amongst the top six economies in the world. I hate GDP as a matrix, but let's use it because even a PPP doesn't help at this point of time. Uh, Now, why should the world help is partly found in this logic that look, suddenly the Indian economy was big. The aspirationally the middle class started growing by leaps and bounds. It is a young population. The demographic dividend, as they call, was driving the economy. Um, Kids started looking, dreaming, literally the American dream, not just in India, but going and working out. Information technology provided that platform, and all that action started. So where it really led us to is also a very different story from say China. So you are a democracy, you have access to all the news in the world. You're a so you have all the stories of successes wherever you are in whichever part of the world, and it fuels material aspirations. So the big queue for India started because suddenly this engine was whirring, but coal and fossil fuel was driving it. India was steadily becoming one of the larger fossil fuel importing countries. Today, it is the world's second largest fossil fuel importing countries. Petrol, the crude, after China, India is the largest importer. And the big Q suddenly happened. Tim Cook is in India, by the way. He was in Mumbai here yesterday. There was a lot of hoo-ha, and he's in Delhi, and he's trying to sell more and more iPhones. Now, I stopped using iPhones, but it's not about my preferences, but there is a reason. There's so much of cobalt, nickel, copper, all that going in. We have to dig mines, and there's no absolute governance. You are exploiting the kids in Democratic Republic of Congo and all kinds of places where it's a lawless world. Unfortunately, the way you mine these raw materials. So you have urbanization going on, and as anywhere else, 70% of greenhouse gases are emitted from the towns and cities. You have deforestation, biodiversity loss. You have soil degradation, more and more of forests coming under agriculture because of soil and water depletion. Agriculture is suffering. Monsoon is not coming on time. So the whole challenge of suddenly a colonized economy becoming a developed economy, you can't always blame the colonizer. So author Amitav Ghosh, and in fact, I would recommend you all this book. It's called The Nutmeg's Curse. I will send you the book details. But this author, please watch him. I'm betting for a Nobel for him someday. He's still young. When you're mid 60s, you're young. Maybe not in India, but much of the Western world. He spends much of his time in the US. But what is Amitabh saying is that, uh, you know, we basically he draws a line on all these. He connects all the dotted lines. Basically, how colonialism led to climate change. But what is happening is today, uh, everyone is a colonizer. The way we are exploiting Mother Nature and the way Father Greed is really at it, Mother Nature is bound to push us back. So he reminds us that, look, guys, we were blaming the British, for instance, in India for colonizing us and looting us. But today, haven't we all become colonizers of nature? So this is a key message. And of course, a lot of other things come in here, and uh, he brings them out. But the key thing is that today India's energy requirement comes largely from fossil fuel. It's more than 75% coming from there. Solar is growing rapidly, but it's still not growing in proportion to the dramatic fall in all the low carbon tech uh, energy production. Uh, Last year, for instance, India had more solar capacity installation than coal or thermal, and uh, there's still a race against finding so-called renewable energy. Unfortunately, the role models are poor because there's constant discussion in the West about what should be green energy, and you're desperately looking at hydro, nuclear, and many other forms of
Even
uh,
gas.
yeah, gas. Yeah, so I was
Right.
coming to that. I mean, the worst is gas. So the Europeans have debated on that, and they've kind of adapted to that, and they're going back and forth. So these creates poor role models, for an economy like India, which needs a clear, decisive move. If this is okay with the developed countries, why is it not good for us? So going for a net zero target to 2070 will be a bit too late. That's my personal feel. Um, then you're seeing the Indians, we as a community or as an audience, you're seeing what is going wrong between US and China. Constant haggling and saber rattling and all that. It's pathetic. It's time for them to assume serious leadership. They are the two superpowers of the world, and say, guys, we are, not only about to kill each other. We are all in a suicidal mode. We need to fix this. Uh, this is theater of the absurd in enacting
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah.
Paris Agreement has just become toothless. Greenwashing is, awash, and but let's not forget that India, there's a lot of voluntary work going on, and there's amazing work. Whether these are self-help groups of women, villagers, educated youth, in terms of looking after soil, looking after enhancing water resources, cleaning up plastic, uh, uh, getting rid of hazardous waste. At the same time, you have the West exporting hazardous waste, plastic, chemicals, dangerous goods to India. Now, this doesn't give you confidence that is the world serious about fixing this problem, or let the bloody hell, uh, whatever need to happen. We will do it at our pace. So we need, when you ask me, uh, should the world be helping India, I think the world has to be very clear in its mind that we have a serious problem. We have to get our acts right. We can practice whatever polity we do, but uh, we have to all survive, and survive not just for the sake of survival, but in a just, equitable way. Uh, for instance, not just the exports. Now, look at how nature works. Now, I was tracking how deforestation in Brazil impacts the melting of Tibetan, or what you call the third poles, ice caps. After the North and South Pole, the most amount of icebergs or glaciers are in the Indo-Tibetan belt. Whether it's China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Central Asia, all the rivers, major rivers, whether it's in Laos, in Cambodia, in Thailand, in Burma, in India, in Pakistan, Afghanistan, right till Central Asia, China, whether it's Yangtze, whether it's Mekong, all these rivers draw their water from the same source. And if these ice caps, or the snow melts and there is nothing left, what's going to happen to this 2.53 billion population? So we have a serious problem. Uh, at the same time, India is locking in into thermal power plants. As I said, we have existing 211 gigawatts operational power plants, 55 gigawatts thermal power plants are in the pipeline. We are looking at uh, about 100 gigawatt of solar energy by 2030, but that needs about 500 billion US dollars of immediate investment, in a staggered way. So how do you deal with it? In the meantime, the heat and humidity is growing. Uh, by 2030, 2.5% to 4.5% of the GDP is at risk. Day and night hours during which outdoor work will be unsafe is going to knock off 15% of GDP by 2030. Urban heat island effect is growing because of the growing urbanization. By 2050, heat waves will cross uh, 35% wet bulb once a decade. And here's another book which I would recommend if none of you have seen it, The Ministry of the Future. And this is not looking at too dystopic a future. The author, Kim Stanley Robinson, talks about 2030 and thereafter. So he's not just talking about scenarios, he's talking about solutions. And it starts with India. So I'm not
Yeah.
trying to panic or create any undue stress. But the fact of the matter is, this is staring at us staring at us in our face. And the last thing that I want to mention, Andrea, Karen, and Peter, is that about 3 weeks ago, I was talking to a forum in Delhi, and this was run by a very eminent economic daily, perhaps one of the largest circulation in the world. But the basic thing is, they wanted to get my perspective of how we can popularize solar energy and how do we overcome, uh, and how can financial institutions foot the bill. And I said, look, let's not look at it from a top down approach. You have to also look at bottoms up approach, because positive social change happens when people come together and work with a hope for future. So we need masses to come in. So my formula was A, B, C, D. So I said, if you want to get the alpha for solar energy, you need uh, you know three things. And the last thing, of course, is diversity, because unless you get in women, and mind you, South Asia. So the problems of India are the problems of South Asia, and it's a big population. You have 800 million women exposed to heat waves, uh, uh, huge issues uh, putting food on the table, huge issues looking after children, huge issues fighting with climate change on a daily basis. They don't have fuel, so they have to go and collect firewood, and the forests have disappeared. There is no wood. So it's a problem of such humongous scale uh, that it does trigger serious humanitarian issues. So you can't ignore that. And this heat is kind of something that this issue and this discussion that we are having cannot ignore that. The B there is the blended capital. And that's where financial institutions, multilateral agencies, commercial banks, development banks, everyone has to get together with philanthropies, with other development institutions which are non-banking, and get their act right to ensure that money is raised by drawing in people who are assured of a return. The best people with virtually low or no default are women who are virtually hand to mouth. I mean, that's been shown in Bangladesh, that's been shown in India. And why can't we tap into that kind of efficiency? The last one that I want to mention is, of course, the Indian states, given the diversity, have local geniuses. One of them is the cooperative movement. One most successful cooperative movement, which made India the world leader, and I call it the genius of India and perhaps the genius of Gujarat is the dairy movement. There is a dairy movement called Amul. I don't want to, uh, take time in explaining what it is, but Amul is an acronym, and thanks to the that engine, today India has become world's largest dairy producer. Yes, currently it's having some challenges because of the drought and because of some of the diseases and heat and all that, but it has become the world's largest dairy producer, whether it's cheese, butter, milk, curd, and you name it, ice creams, and a lot of local other sweets, stuff like that. Now, when that could successfully come up in the last 4 decades, can you transplant that model into solar energy? And can we have an Amul of solar energy? That was my proposition. And
Mhm.
many in the audience really loved the thought. And I'm just highlighting that because you have successful models which have worked in rural India. That's where action is required. That's where poverty, is more disturbing. That's where we can't wait forever. That's where fossil fuel is not going to go. Then other parts of the country, including Rajasthan, which is a neighboring state, women have taken into selling of solar energy gadgets, and you know uh, that frees them, that gives them some surplus income, that looks after their health. They can spend more time for children. They can ensure children, they can afford to send children to school, and generally eat well, eat better, if not like the middle class or the more rich ones. So the point is, the transformative elements are there. Can we tap them and embed them into where it is causing the most pain? Um, at 4 degrees centigrade, I come from the insurance industry, and I tell people, look, guys, at 3 degrees centigrade, much of what you insure will become uninsurable. And
Yeah.
it's not India, it's the all people haven't woken up. Unfortunately, India is in slumber. The regulatory global mechanism is at sleep. I have no qualms in saying that. Uh, so at 4 degrees, the planet's carrying capacity will be only 1 billion people. So imagine, it's not the Ministry of the Future saying that, this is science.
Mm.
4 degrees centigrade. 7 billion people have no place. Now, this is not sensationalism. This is fact of life. How do we ensure the well-being? Are we aware of all these issues? So most people would use a stereotype of flight or fight, but I'm saying fright or flight. There's still no major sense of fright. But the
Mm.
billionaires, some of the billionaires are taking to flight and they want to go and settle on the Mars. So either
Yeah.
of it is not helpful. Uh, so whether it was Gandhi who said, and I can't not quote him, that you have to be the change that you want to see in this world. I'm sorry, I'm not saying exactly the same words, but basically that's the essence. And of course, Albert Einstein saying that you can't solve the problem from the same mindset that created that problem. So we
Mm.
need something radical to happen. The world has enough of that. Peter raised that. Yes, the technology uh, is there. We don't need anything of rocket science. Karen has said so many things which can be applied in larger countries. India has many experiments. I travel to China at least once a year. Unfortunately, the last 3-4 years now, I've not been able to travel, but looking forward to. And it amazes me about the energy and whatever. But what worries me, the three biggest countries that that are the three biggest polluters: India, China, US. The three most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change are India, China, America. We cannot ignore these three. We have to get them together. We have to see this as a common problem and not any country specific problem. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think I've been
That
talking
was
too much.
great. No. I could listen for hours. I think it's just so important to understand that perspective from India and the scale of the problem. You were talking about like the 800,000 women, 800,000 across Southeast Asia. One of the
800
comments you made,
million. Sorry.
yeah, right. You said wet bulb temperatures will be hitting once every 10 years by 2050. So I actually think we're going to see that this year. I know India last year, and I think Iran last year had some wet bulb temperature moments. But, so in Thailand here, we had 46.5 as the hottest 45.4, the hottest temperature ever recorded in Thailand. And, the air conditioning couldn't keep up. And I was speaking to another friend in India who was saying, once you started to get over 50, the electrical wires started to sag, and then you'd have blackouts and they'd break. And we saw in China with their longest drought, where they basically just had no energy to cool their homes. And correct me if I'm wrong here, for every 0.1 of a degree in warming, it equates to 2 to 3 degrees in actual temperature increase, right? So if we've had 45.4 and we're about to hit this massive El Nino where this enormous bulb of heat is going to be released from the Pacific Ocean, and the warming is expected between 0.2 and 0.8. So from 45.4, say it's 3 degrees, that's going to be over 50 in Thailand. If it's 0.8, you're going to be up in the high 60s, and that's completely unlivable, right? So this is something we've been going through. No electricity, you have no water. Yeah. So, today I just said to my husband, we need to stockpile some water, because if we get into this situation, we need to be able to drink, right? And in India, you had it last year during La Nina. Now we're going into El Nino, which is expected to start as early as May, not the end of the year like they expected. So I'm actually extremely, extremely concerned for this entire region that we're about to see temperatures we've never seen before, and all the science is pointing that way. You look at the ocean, how warm the ocean is at the moment; it's hit records. So if it's about to release a blob of heat, that's going to warm the entire world's temperature, right? Atmosphere. I think this is the year that we're going to see something, and I'm extremely concerned about what's going to happen in the short term, not in the long term. Are you seeing that too?
You're asking me? Yes, of course. Andrea, it's right here. I've been in and out of Mumbai since February. This was the first time in my life. I've been a long time stayer here. In February, I wouldn't switch on an aircon. We don't have a centralized air conditioning in the apartments I live, but we have our own ACs. And in late Feb, I can't ever think of even switching on a fan. I had to use the aircon for 2 hours to cool down the house. So the point is, and I said, I hope this is not what is the signal in terms of what is coming. But the last 2+ months have, each day gets warmer than the other, and once in a while you have cool air and you say, oh, okay, that must be an odd one. But each summer, I think I believe in the saying that this is your coolest summer ever. So each summer will get hotter. So this is not sensationalism. This is the reality unfolding, and this is killing our soil. This is killing the agriculture. This is messing up our rivers, and we put in more and more fertilizers, the phosphates and the potassiums and whatever that goes in. It is killing the fishes. It's more and more plastic in there, and with this heating and precipitation, you're going to have more acid rain and more destruction. So I think something's got to be done now.
And there's a big pushback on doomers, and I spend a lot of time with doomers, because to me they're the only ones who are communicating the crisis and the emergency without emotion. They've accepted it, right? That's the state. And intellectually they are correct, but in my heart I can never become a full-time doomer, although I know they're correct, right? But now it's now, and the urgency is so huge now. And I think, when you're sitting in Western Australia or when you're sitting in Singapore, you might not have you been touched by the extremes yet. Do you feel that you've had the moments like we're experiencing right now with this heat wave? Pete?
I definitely think I think it's still pretty, I mean, it's hot, but I don't think it's unbearable. I think people need to be able to feel more of it. And, but of course we are seeing news reports. So, but even Singapore, I think we've had like the hottest temperatures in the last couple of years. So this is a reality. I think we need, our bodies are hot, but I think we need cooler heads. And, there is this saying, because I work a lot in high trust cultures, small minds talk about people, average minds talk about events, and big minds talk about ideas. And I think what happens is that there is so much us versus them, whether it's between countries or let's say us versus big oil. Because of this, we're not actually really looking for new situations, new ideas to kind of forge bridges and make things work. So I think we need a lot more about changing a trust culture, kind of working together. And I remember, I'm not sure which, there was a meatless company as well, whether it's Beyond Meat or Impossible Meats, I think.
Beyond Meat, yes.
It's a Beyond Meat, yes. And they actually sparked the most massive growth when they decided we're not going to take down the meat industry. It's not meatless versus meat. It's literally about collaborating and helping people to see the value of actually having a more profitable business, growth. So I think we need to see how we can even, join forces, because a lot of people in big oil, they also have kids. They also want a better planet. So let's see how we could start reaching above. And I think what needs to happen is young, in education, we do need more subjects talking about politics, where people feel they can make a difference. We want people to actually start, communicating, realizing that they can create a change, because the new generations, they are the ones who will be the most creative, the most passionate. So they shouldn't just be chasing grades. They should be feeling that they can control their destiny. And it needs to start in every classroom.
I think very well said. And they are the ones who are going to be most affected, because they are going to inherit the planet, from us. And, and in fact, I want to just add there that you made a fantastic point that, we need to collaborate and join hands rather than be confronting. And the point is, we need to think, I'm just trying to recall the name of this native Indian chief from one of the First Nations in America and from North America. And he explained how his tribe would look at the next 7 generations. And we need a similar thought process here. We seem to have forgotten. And yes, the oil energy guys and the coal guys, everyone would have children and subsequent generations to think about. And none of them can escape what is otherwise coming on us.
Yeah, it was funny. I was going to jump on LinkedIn the other day because people were sharing an article about the dirty money from the banks, right, that you mentioned earlier, Karen. And I was going to jump on. I'm like, come on, guys, we've got to stop doing this, right? So, yes, the banks are giving money to the fossil fuel industry, but actually the fossil fuel industry isn't investing in its infrastructure to make it safer. So there's more methane being released because there's no investment that they can put into it because they're not allowed to invest in it, right? And then on the other side, like the entire global infrastructure, the roads that we drive on, the traffic lights, everything that we've got are funded by fossil fuels. So if you take them out of the economy, we're pretty much screwed. But the pensions industry, which is such an interesting industry to look into, their money is in fossil fuels right now because that's where they're making money, right? So, the shift that we've got is everything's interlinked, and by creating enemies, we're first of all, we're not taking responsibility for our own part in the story, but by creating them as enemies, I don't actually think we're going anywhere. It's like you were talking about the colonialism and the history in India, Praveen. Like I've spoken to so many of my Indian friends, and they're still so angry with the British. And it's like at some point we have to stop being angry because we all got ourselves here, every single one of us. And I just think we need to say, call a climate emergency, get the best brains in the world together and sort out these big issues. We need universal basic income because your pension doesn't exist. People think their pensions exist. Well, it's either going to be destroyed because the climate's destroyed, or it's going to be destroyed because fossil fuel industry is going to go. So,
Absolutely.
we're just got to think in a whole new way. And I think it's just time to step up and do that. Pete, do you want to add?
Oh, yeah, look, you've said it all more eloquently than I can. Yeah, look, I think it's time is always a very powerful message. So, yeah, 100% agree with you all. Yeah.
Yeah, it's time. All right, so we've gone over a little bit, but I just want to, I knew I was going to enjoy this, and I know that we could go on for hours and hours, but I'm sure you've all got things to do. But I really want to say thank you to all three of you for coming and joining me. I know it's a big topic, but we've been in overshoot since the 70s, and that means we're taking more from the environment than it can provide, right? So we've got a massive debt, and we need to get back. And countries like Jamaica and Indonesia are the only countries who are close to not being in overshoot. Did you know that? Yeah. I'd like to go. I want to go to both of them and say, how does the average person live, so that we can share it, right? But we need human exclusion zones. We need to bring nature back, flourishing everywhere we can.
Absolutely.
And we need to be in harmony, and we're not. And people still don't want to talk about it, but I can assure you, this waiting to be physically impacted by climate, the longer we wait, the harder it is. Yeah, right.
Yes.
And so we're sitting in the worst heat wave ever to hit Southeast Asia, and it's going to get worse. And I'm literally terrible. So I'm trying to work out a way to protect the people who are living down the road with tin roofs because they work in a workers' camp, right? Because they can't survive. I know in India, there must have been massive deaths already. So
absolutely. Yeah. So it doesn't really get captured because, people may die of kidney failure or heart ailment because heat causes a lot of these issues, circulatory problems, neuro problems, kidneys. And I just want to just reinforce what you just said in my way that, there's a quote from Naomi Klein, and she says, the biggest killer is inequality. So that's even worse. So heat, climate change, yes, but inequality is the killer.
Yeah. Praveen, I might get you back when I do the diversity, inequality, climate courage, because I think it's a huge part of the conversation. Women and children are absolutely at the highest risk.
I'd love that. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, the refugee camps, they're full of children, 50% of children and women, and it's bringing women and Indigenous people and all communities into the conversation, absolutely critical. But anyway, thank you guys. Thank you so much. We'll end the broadcast now, and hope everyone took something away from it. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to do one with Steve, my husband, and we're just going to talk about. It's pretty hard being married to me at the moment because there's a lot going on, and I'm trying to understand it, and he's the bouncing board, right? But I thought it would be interesting just to sort of. I want to talk about how I've spent a year in the doom world and how I'm sort of trying to pull myself back into hope. Because if we have no hope, we've got no chance.
Absolutely.
And there is hope. But it's everyone needs to start getting involved.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Andrea.
So guys,